on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, we cover everything from Kate Gate, that photo controversy, to the President of the United States being forced to apologise to an alleged murderer. And talking about apologies, we'll have a look at the struggle sessions underway for those who were critical of Sam Kerr. Some of the apologies and rationalisations are frankly pitiful. Joining me tonight is Adam B. Coleman, Louise Elliott, Daniel Wild, and we'll have Kinsey Schofield with the latest royal and celebrity news. And as always, plenty of lefties losing it, including this much-needed lecture.
I'm so tired of white cis women being more dedicated to being called a healer than actually doing the work to be a healer. The only thing that you're worried about healing is your bruised ego and being confronted with your complacency in genocide and your obsession with upholding privilege. We do not need more nice white women. Are you kidding me?
Yes, those nice white women have had it too good for too long. Let's bring in a man who exemplifies toxic white male masculinity, Daniel Wild. Daniel, Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Normally I'm not introduced in those terms, but I like it. I think I'm going to stick with it. Let's talk about something serious, though. We've been talking about this issue on this program just about every single night. The youth crime crisis across the nation, particularly here in Victoria. And today's front page of the Herald Sun reveals a plan to raise the age of criminal responsibility to 14 could be scrapped as pressure intensifies on the state government to tackle this crisis, the youth crime crisis. There is a push by senior Labor figures to significantly water down the Allen government's controversial youth justice reform. This is a much needed, some common sense from hard left Labor. There are obviously some wise heads in there that can see not only is this bad policy, but it is hugely unpopular.
It is unpopular, it's bad, and raising the age of criminal responsibility would not do what it claims to do, because it would just make crime worse, because we know that there's issues with those who are older adults of recruiting younger people to do crime. So that's going to get it worse if you raise the age of responsibility. This is a common sense move. Clearly, the government is now paving the way for a walk back on this, which is a good thing to do. We know that in Victoria and in Queensland, there's a real massive crime problem, especially with young people. And at the moment, our political leaders are locking up the wrong people. I mean, a third of people in jails across the country have not committed a violent crime. Now, they should be punished, but they shouldn't be in jail. At the same time, we have violent crime and those committing sexual crime who are out on the streets. They're not being arrested in big enough numbers, and they're not in jail in big enough numbers. So this is hopefully the start of some common sense policing to keep the community safe.
Now let's talk about Matildas star Sam Kerr, and it has been fascinating watching the left try to deal with this issue. First, there was the confusion because they didn't know what she had said. Then it was just indignation. How could dare anybody suggest what was said allegedly is racist? Because you can't be racist towards white people, Daniel. Apparently that's what the popular opinion is amongst the left these days. And former Socceroo star and left-wing activist Craig Foster, he's apologised to Sam Kerr for calling stupid white bastard a racist thing to say. Kerr is fighting a charge of racially aggravated harassment of a police officer for allegedly using that slur against a cop. But Foster says he was mistaken in thinking any discriminatory, demeaning or hostile comment made against any colour was racism, adding, as many experts and leading anti-racism groups have pointed out, interpersonal comments can be offensive, abusive or inappropriate. However, racism can only be perpetuated against a marginalised person or group, which anti-racism frameworks are specifically designed to protect. Oh my gosh, talk about, it seems like he's been sent to some sort of a re-education camp.
Yep.
And is now mouthing the correct platitudes. What a backward notion that you cannot be racist against white people, or the notion that a working class police officer who may be white is the oppressor when dealing with someone who may be a multi-millionaire but is a person of colour.
I've got to be honest, halfway through that I gave up. I don't understand what any of that means. It's confusing doing those mental contortions. I mean, you belled the cat in your Herald Sun column last week on this. Left don't know what to do, and that's an example of that. But we all know the reality here is Sam Kerr is a part of a protected class. If she were not ticking all of the politically correct ideology boxes, the response to her would be much different. And it just shows that there are certain rules for the left and rules for everybody else. And I think this just shows, I mean, these are the people, don't forget, that were pushing the voice to Parliament onto us to divide us by race. They're obsessed by this, idea of identity politics and race. And I think Australians have just had enough of this. You shouldn't discriminate against people no matter what their race, religion, ethnicity or gender. It's pretty simple. Treat each other as individuals. And Australians are getting pretty fed up with this sort of protected elite getting different rules.
I am absolutely against words being criminalised, even hurtful words. So I want to make it clear, even if Sam Kerr is guilty of this, I'm not in support of her being charged criminally and facing a possible jail term. I think it's all absurd. But for the activist class who are obsessed with race and racial grievances, they support these laws. And if you support them, then expect them to be applied evenly. You cannot exempt certain races from accountability, which is what they're wanting to do. Now, let's move on to Labor ministers being called spending addicts as they continue to force taxpayers to foot their bills in the cost of living crisis. The latest offender is Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones, who billed taxpayers $43,000 for a hire car. At the same time, he also billed $11,000 for a personal vehicle. How many cars does he need? He's accused of double dipping on MP entitlements. It is interesting, isn't it? Some of these socialist types, once they get into power, all the largesse that's taxpayer funded, they don't miss any of it.
That's right. I mean, I think he's just going to explain why he needed to do this. I mean, so far, I don't think he's explained it. Now, there are legitimate reasons for MPs to use different cars at different times, depending on where they're travelling. So if they have a legitimate business reason to be using these entitlements, then fair enough. But there does appear to be a pattern of behaviour. We saw Tony Burke, now we've seen Stephen Jones. It's not the amount of money that's the problem, it's the mentality that they have. If it were their own money, I guarantee you they wouldn't be spending it in this way. And the MPs that are typically the worst at this are the first to criticise their opponents, like Bronwyn Bishop, who clearly did the wrong thing, at least ethically speaking. So they criticise her and they criticise others, but it's a different set of rules when it comes to their own behaviour. And it's just another example of this hypocrisy that we see out of the political class.
Now, this is fantastic news. We talked about this on Outsiders. There hasn't been a great deal of coverage on this topic in Australia, but Irish voters have overwhelmingly voted down two proposed changes to their constitution. The changes were concerned with references to family and proposed altering things like the state recognises the family as the natural, primary and fundamental unit group of society. To the state recognises the family, whether founded on marriage or on other durable relationships, as the natural, primary and fundamental unit group of society. You can see what they're trying to do there. It also proposed to delete references to the woman and her life in the home and mothers and their duties in the home. But both changes were rejected in what some Conservatives, such as No campaigner Maria Steen, call a rejection of wokeism in Ireland.
Clearly a rejection by the Irish people of the political elites, NGOs like the National Women's Council, who are funded by public monies and who really pushed the government to run this referendum. It's also a rejection of a campaign of misinformation by the government, who would not engage with the reasonable concerns of the no side. And it's also a rejection of a government that seems more concerned with social media plaudits than actually getting on with the business of governing the country.
This was really quite something to see. It was reminiscent of Brexit, Trump in 2016, our own voice referendum, where you had just so many groups in one camp and they were all on the wrong side of history.
You're right, those parallels are all apt, and they reflect this trend in Western society of the mainstream rejecting the overtures of the political class and the elites. When you look at the opinion polling, it's fascinating. It had the no vote at 30% at the start of March, and the no vote ended up in the high 60s for one of them, in the low 70s for the other. But to me, this is really fascinating because over the last few years, Ireland has, through its constitutional referendums, altered marriage. So they have same-sex marriage. They also expanded the permissibility of abortion as well. So it's not as if they're anti-everything, but what the Irish people are saying is the political class are going too far.
Yeah.
And what it shows is that we are at a turning point in the Western world where when votes are put to the people, they reject identity politics and they reject wokeism and division, and this is just another example of that. But I bet you, Rita, this is another example of why the political class will probably stop putting referendums to the people because they keep losing and they're going to try and do it anyway.
That's a very good point indeed. And then already the excuses are starting that the voter turnout wasn't as high as they expected, and that's why the result is looking the way that is. No, it's not. It has nothing to do with that. Now let's go to London, where the Metropolitan Police are being accused of double standards again, this time for arresting a protester who called Hamas terrorists. He had a sign that said Hamas are terrorists. He was assaulted by pro-Palestinian protesters. Let's have a look. So we see the man there assaulted, manhandled, but what did the police do? They rush him away and then arrest him. Again, the victim is the one who's treated like the criminal, not the violent mob. A Metropolitan Police spokesman said it was not accurate that the man was arrested for having an anti-Hamas placard, instead insisting he was arrested for assault, but he was later, I love this word, de-arrested after officers reviewed the footage of the altercation and realised he didn't assault anybody. They assaulted him. It's outrageous, Daniel. It's not a one-off. It's certainly happened right here in Melbourne. It's happened in Sydney, repeatedly in London and other places where there's this two-tier policing and the police consistently siding with the violent mob.
Yeah, I mean, I feel sorry for the cop on the beat because I think they're often responding to failed leadership, failed political leadership, failed policing leadership. I bet you they're too scared to do the right thing because they know there's going to be ramifications. Everything's filmed these days on social media. Everything's contorted. It's easier for them just to do the politically correct thing, as wrong as that is. And I think we saw that in Victoria with COVID, where a lot of the police who were going out there disrupting protesters, shutting down playgrounds, I don't think a lot of them believed it, but they were responding to failed leadership. And that's not a reason to go along with it.
No.
But I've got to say that they're probably trying to do the right thing. And this comes to the point where we need to have proper leadership. You said it rightly, a two-tiered system. It's political policing. The job of the police is to keep the community safe. That's the end of the story. If they're not doing that, then trust and confidence in police will go down. You'll start to see vigilantism. We don't want to go down that road, but you can understand why some people feel that they need to do that.
Well, I think faith in the police force has been shaken through COVID and through these sort of incidents. And it's typically law-abiding citizens who are reassessing how they feel about the police, and you don't want that. Now, one of the questions I've got to ask after seeing a lot more of that footage, and there's extensive footage, is why were those protesters so upset, so enraged with the man standing there doing nothing other than holding up a sign saying Hamas are terrorists? I mean, are they pro-Palestinian protesters? Are they pro-Hamas protesters? Because I would have thought he could stand there peacefully and you go about protesting what you want to protest, unless you actually are upset by Hamas being called terrorists. Now, finally, the ABC grilled Energy Minister Chris Bowen on his government's nuclear energy ban on insiders. Have a look.
Well, the market hasn't sorted out in any other country in the world. Every country in the world with nuclear has required massive transfers of taxpayer wealth to the nuclear constructors. Now, if we were to go down that road in Australia, we'd really be sending the signal that we're prepared to do that. that we are prepared to use taxpayers' money to subsidise the development of the nuclear industry, and we're not.
Just in fairness, though, Minister, you do. The government's building Snowy 2.0. You have the scheme, the capacity investment scheme that subsidises renewables. We don't know how much that's costing.
Well, very different approaches.
Very different approaches, really. The amount of government subsidies and investment in renewables is enormous. Taxpayers have been subsidising that sector for some time now. How can this double standard exist when any sort of subsidy of nuclear is frowned upon?
Well, Chris Bowen's struggling there, and good on David Spears for asking a couple of tough questions of him. Chris Bowen is sort of making this up as he goes when he says that the market won't favour renewables. Well, we don't know because there's a ban there at the moment. He's, I think, the first federal energy minister in a long time to oversee blackouts, which we had in Victoria. That was a direct result of the net zero policies, which are pushing off baseload power supply at the expense of reliability on the grid. Clearly, we need to have a debate about nuclear. We need to remove the ban on nuclear to see if it's viable in this country. We also need to fix the system now. We've got a problem in the system right now, which means we need more coal-fired power and more gas in the system that can provide that baseload power. But instead, the government is still committed to this renewables-only, renewables everywhere policy that is driving bills up and businesses offshore.
Daniel Weil, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
The next Tasmanian state election is less than 2 weeks away, and things are getting ugly in the Apple Isle. Louise Elliott, who's the independent candidate for Clark and a Hobart City Councillor, says a trans activist threatened violence against her at a local shopping centre. Louise joins me now. Louise, tell me what happened and why you feel some women are being intimidated into silence.
Yes, thank you, Rita. So I was in between talking to voters at a local shopping centre, talking to them about housing, healthcare, education, cost of living, all those sorts of things. And in between discussions, I heard a voice behind me, and I turned around to see a man say to me, "I'm going to rip you to shreds." And then he made a strong arm symbol and yelled out trans rights and stuck his finger up at me. So it was a really unsettling experience, and thankfully it was the only negative experience of the day. But I think it really does signify a change in culture where this sort of thing is seen as acceptable to some people, and then I perhaps even brought it on myself, disturbingly, for believing that, women need their own sports, women need their own single-sex prisons, shelters, change rooms, that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's not an experience I want to repeat again. And I think that the politicians down here have a lot to answer for, because I think this culture that allows this sort of abuse to occur is being pushed really hard, especially by Labor and the Greens, and the Liberals are sadly very silent on the matter. So that's why I'm standing. We need politicians with a backbone.
Oh, we do need politicians with a backbone, and it is so disappointing to have those who are supposedly conservative be absent in this fight, this significant fight for women's rights. Is this matter with police? Will you be making a police complaint?
I haven't gone as far as that. Because the person was in their employer's uniform, I made sure that the employer knew, because as an employer, I would want to know. It's atrocious. But I mean, I don't go down the cancel culture path, but I do think there should be accountability. And as an employee, that's completely unacceptable. It's unacceptable for anyone to be threatening. But no, I haven't taken as far as police.
Now, independent journalist Michael Schellenberger has been exposing the many failures and inconsistencies in transgender medicine in his W Path files, investigating the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. His findings, what he has revealed with these documents, interviews where you see discussions between doctors, it's just devastating. Even The Guardian is calling these revelations disturbing. Hannah Barnes, writing in The Guardian UK, noted the documents reveal doctors discuss the possibility that 16-year-old patients have liver cancer as the result of taking these hormones. WPATH President Dr. Marcy Bowers comments on the impact of early blocking of puberty on sexual function in adulthood. She writes, to date, I'm unaware of an individual claiming ability to orgasm when they were blocked at Tanner 2. Tanner stage 2 is the beginning of puberty, so it can be as young as 9 in girls. Reading through this, Louise, the question is this happening right here in Australia? How young are kids when they're prescribed these sorts of hormones? How young are teenagers when they're committing to irreversible surgeries?
Yeah, I'm sad to say it is absolutely happening in Australia, and it's happening at increasing numbers. I mean, over the past several years, the numbers of kids being referred to gender clinics, the numbers of kids being put on wrong sex hormones, the opposite sex to what they're actually born, has exploded tenfold. And the information that's come out from the WPATH there, it is heartbreakingly sad and so disturbing. There's a lot that we already knew that was wrong with this affirmation-only process. You know, we knew about the fertility issues, we knew about spines not seizing. There's more stuff obviously coming out, things around surgeons mucking around with impossible genital configurations, people, surgeons struggling with how they're going to handle people that have serious psychological issues. For example, when a patient has multiple personalities and those multiple personalities have different genders, how they're going to handle that situation. So it is terrible. And what we need, again, I think, is this comes back to our politicians, because more and more evidence is coming out, especially from the UK, which is a few years ahead of us in terms of having this ideology embedded into its healthcare. We need our politicians to look at what's happening and put an end to it now, to start to look and make sure that our kids, our precious kids and future generations, are receiving healthcare that's based on true medical evidence, not ideology being pushed by activists.
I do wonder, though, whether we're in even a worse position than the UK, because overseas we're already seeing a backtracking from some of the activists and doctors with each new revelation. But here, we haven't even had a thorough review of these practices. They've done that in the UK, they've done that in parts of North America, Scandinavia. Here we seem to be too scared to even look at the data and the practices.
You're exactly right, Rita. You hit the nail on the head there in terms of how far behind we are at even starting to question what we're doing. And even more concerning is the fact that the various parties and political organisations and activists, they're wanting to embed further and further anyone that questions this ideology, anyone that disagrees with the concepts that it tries to push is a bigot and it's hate speech and it's illegal and you must be silenced. So we have it from both perspectives. We have, you're not allowed to question the medicine, and if you do, you are legally punished and laws are being weaponised to silence you.
Louise Elliott, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And still to come, a bumper edition of Lefties Losing It. You don't want to miss that. And Adam B. Coleman on why Biden is losing popularity among Black and Hispanic voters. That's next. You're watching the Rita Panahi Show, and now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's start, Lefties, with some frankly disturbing vision. Just over a week ago, I brought you sickening footage from Deer Creek School District in Oklahoma, where students were licking the toes of what we were told were other students in front of shocked folks during the school's so-called wonderful week of fundraising. I did wonder at the time what sort of sick, insane adults thought this was a good idea, this was in any way acceptable. Any parent, teacher or school administrator who oversaw this activity, I think, needs a visit from the authorities. Gross. But I'm here to tell you it gets worse. This wasn't a one-time brain fade. There is a pattern of depravity.
This video was taken from the YouTube channels of Edmond North and Memorial, publicly posted footage of their students licking chocolate, peanut butter, and other condiments off feet and armpits, all during their week-long philanthropy events, known as Balto Week for Edmond North and Swine Week for Edmond Memorial. The most recent video is from 2020, but we found videos going back to 2015. We sent the video you just watched to Edmond Public Schools asking for their response. They noted the feet-licking, quote, didn't happen this year, and the district spokesperson didn't respond directly to the videos we sent.
I can't even watch that. It is that gross. I mean, what are they thinking? I'm starting to think prison terms are a good idea in this region. Now, let's go to something a little bit more lighthearted. A young lass who identifies as a hawk. Not the hawthorn type, though, unfortunately.
My name is Horace, and I'm a red-tailed hawk. In our world, I do have the body of a hawk, but while fronting, I consider myself a therian, because I am in a human body, but my identity is still a hawk. I am doing my best to come to terms with living in a human body.
Fascinating, fascinating stuff. Now to the UK, where this young lady from Cambridge with a £1,500 backpack destroyed a beautiful work of art in the name of Palestinian resistance. Again, a jail term will see a stop to that sort of thing quick smart, but they get a slap on the wrist if that. Now, here's some important advice for white women, particularly nice white women, from a lefty losing it.
I'm so tired of white cis women being more dedicated to being called a healer than actually doing the work to be a healer. The only thing that you're worried about healing is your bruised ego and being confronted with your complacency in genocide and your obsession with upholding privilege. We do not need more nice white women. Are you kidding me? And stop asking marginalized people to do the work for you because you don't feel comfortable with it. I am so tired of having conversations with white cis women where they're more upset about the fact that they're being called in or called out than the fact that they're harming marginalized people. The fact that there is literal genocide that they are paying for with the advertisements that they're putting all over Instagram.
Literal genocide paid for by social media. I want to hear more, but I don't know if we can handle it. Now, let's end lefties with Robert De Niro, showing that he is beyond help. The man is utterly deranged. Listen here for his paranoid fantasies about Donald Trump.
Nothing at all, nothing redeemable in him. And we have to, and whoever the people are who want to vote for him, and there look like intelligent people around there. Somebody, for some reason, it can't be. It cannot be. If he wins the election, you won't be on the show anymore. He'll come looking for me. There'll be things that happen that none of us can imagine.
Now, the left are losing it after Joe Biden used the word illegal to refer to the alleged killer of college student Laken Riley. Now, to be clear, the accused is an illegal immigrant in America illegally, but that comment by Biden in his State of the Union address last week has led to an almighty meltdown from the left, including current Democrat politicians. So much so that the president was forced to apologise. Let's have a look at his comments at the State of the Union and the apology.
Lincoln Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right.
You use the word illegal when talking about the man who allegedly killed Laken Riley.
An undocumented person. And I shouldn't have used illegal. It's undocumented.
Not content with that, Biden then launched into an astonishing series of claims and lies, firstly about Donald Trump, and then he claimed that illegal immigrants built the country.
When I spoke about the difference between Trump and me, one of the things I talked about on the border was that the way he talks about vermin, the way he talks about these people polluting the blood. I talked about what I'm not going to do, what I won't do. I'm not going to treat any of these people with disrespect. Look, they built the country.
Joining me now is the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing, Adam B. Coleman. Adam, It's incredible to watch the President of the United States just casually conflate illegal immigrants, even an alleged murderer, with legal migrants who he says built the country.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that he does this, and while they're trying to present it as a gaffe, I think he truly believes what we all believe is that illegal. There's nothing wrong with calling a person illegal if they're here illegally, But what this is him signaling to the progressive left, who hyper focuses on language rather than the actions of heinous people. So what's more important is what they're calling the person who murdered, rather than the person who was actually murdered. Their priorities are all screwed up. And this type of behavior is what leads for people like myself, who's a former Democrat, to leave the party because of this constant need to virtue signal to the far left.
I do want to speak to you about Black and Hispanic voters in particular turning away from the Democrats. But just on this particular issue, it's no wonder he is losing so many people, because it is shaping up to be the biggest issue of the coming presidential election. The illegal immigration crisis in the US, more than 7 million, well more than 7 million have come in illegally during Biden's administration. And it just seems not to be a priority. Sometimes he talks the talk, but his actions speak louder than those words.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I personally believe that this illegal immigration situation will be the number one issue when the election comes. Whether we realize it or not, these illegal immigrants who are coming into this country, they're going everywhere. They're not just staying in Texas, they're not just staying in border states, they're going everywhere. They're going into major cities. And how it affects Black American voters, 60% of Black Americans live in 10 states. And those states, they live within those major cities, and you can name those states by the major cities. So where are these people going? They're going to places like Chicago, like New York City. And what's happening? The resources are leaving the American citizens, including the Black citizens who live in these cities, to support people that we have no idea where they're from, why they're here, or if they're here legally, or if they're criminals or anything like that. There are no checks and balances when it comes to this stuff. And what they're essentially doing is setting up a permanent lower class of people who get to live under the radar, get supported by the system, and eventually become the next voter base.
Now, it's no wonder Biden is losing support amongst minorities, including Hispanic voters, with a recent NYT poll showing Trump has a 6-point lead with that group over Biden. The New York Times is hardly friendly to the Republicans. At the same time that Biden was apologising to Laken Riley's alleged killer for calling him an illegal, Donald Trump was in Georgia meeting with her grieving family and friends, and he slammed President Biden for allowing her killer into the country in the first place.
When I say he was an illegal alien, he was an illegal immigrant, he was an illegal migrant, and he shouldn't have been in our country, and he never would have been under the Trump policy.
And Adam, today we have another example of a broken system. A Honduras national who entered the US illegally is wanted for homicide in his home country, who was found guilty of felony assault with a weapon and domestic violence. Well, he was released from a Rhode Island court despite an active immigration detainer for his custody. This is just incredible, Adam. I mean, it's one thing to incentivise illegal immigration, and you could argue that is happening, but allowing accused murderers to roam free, it's a new low.
Yeah, this situation that's happening at the border is unprecedented. There is no control. No one is held accountable for the failures. As it stands, Joe Biden is the leader of the federal government, right? The buck stops with him. And yet now he wants to make it some sort of priority when we're getting closer and closer to the election season. But where was he for the past, going on 4 years, right? When the situation was getting worse and worse. He was nowhere. Matter of fact, they basically wanted to minimize that there was no crisis at the border. They only wanted to acknowledge that there is a crisis once those border states started sending these people to all different types of cities across the country. Then it became everybody's problem, right? And that's the comfort of not living in a border state, right? You get to be a sanctuary city when you're actually living sanctuary-like living, right? You're far away from the problem. It's easy to say, oh, yes, bring them in, when you don't have to deal with these people, when you don't have to manage the situation, and when they don't take your resources. Well, what's happening? Even Democrat mayors are going to the Biden administration saying, do something, and they're being disappointed when they're not there to support them.
Now, switching to a different issue, in Canada, a documentary produced by Radio Canada has exposed just how quickly young, vulnerable children are being pushed into life-changing hormone treatments and gender reassignment surgeries. The French-speaking documentary followed a 14-year-old girl at her first appointment. This is her first appointment at a private clinic in Quebec. She was given a testosterone prescription and even asked about possible surgeries just 9 minutes into her appointment. Again, Adam, this is incredible. This is a trend we have seen in the West, in North America, parts of Europe, right here in Australia. And we are slowly getting some clarity around the medical practices in this field.
Yeah, what's happening to these children who are confused, who might be experiencing dysphoria, or who are maybe just being caught up in a trend? What's happening to them is that the adults in the room are failing them, right? The adults are treating the children like adults. And as soon as they have a whimsical idea of what they want to become, they just go along with it. There are no hurdles for these young people, right? They have people who are enabling them. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing enablers who are ultimately benefiting the medical industry. We're seeing them benefit big pharma, right? Where do you think these products are made? Or look at all these surgeons who are cutting the breasts off of young girls, of young, healthy girls, right? Who makes money off of that? And just like, you know, any other major issue like foreign wars, always follow the money. And the money always leads to the medical industry, right? But at the end, these kids are left tormented. They're left unresolved. And that's when suicidality actually occurs.
Well, there's all sorts of data being released. Michael Schellenberger is doing incredible work uncovering some of the practices in this field, and it is frankly frightening. I think it's one of the biggest medical scandals of our time. Now, finally, on your Wrong Speak publishing website, you've published articles exploring how black voters are often portrayed as Democrats who can forget this from Biden?
But I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
But you say black voters are actually more likely to be conservative at heart, even if they don't vote that way. This year, the polls are showing that Joe Biden and the Democrats are not getting the enthusiasm they expected from black voters. This is something you anticipated would happen last month, describing the Biden administration as treating black and Hispanic voters like a spouse they are cheating on, assuring them they care about them while spending lavishly on their new love. I love that analogy. And that new love in this case is illegal migrants. Tell me about that phenomenon, because we talked about Hispanic voters switching to Trump. Trump's winning unprecedented support from that group compared to previous Republicans. But black voters have been such a solid voting bloc for the Democrats for a long time. Something like 90% vote for the Democrats.
Yeah, this actually has more to do with demographics, locations, and which political party fights for these particular locations. So, you know, throughout the United States, you look at, you know, every 4 years when the presidential race happens, you see them count all these rural areas. They show up red, and then what happens? They count these blue cities, and they lose a state. Why? Because majority of the people who live in these states live in the cities. Well, this also counts for Black Americans. And what ends up happening is the Republicans aren't necessarily fighting for the vote within these cities. So it's actually an unreasonable ask to say, hey, I know we don't show up locally and we have nobody that runs in your locality, and we haven't been there for decades, but vote for us in the national election, right? It's an unreasonable ask. And so what ends up happening is that everyone presumes that Black Americans are just in love with the Democrats rather than it being that they're the only choice, right? You can't vote for a party that isn't on the ballot. And from time after time, whether it be major cities, small cities in these states, you can look, Democrats run unopposed. And the choice is, do you want a blue dog moderate Democrat or do you want a communist?
Adam B. Coleman, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
And still to come, royal reporter Kinsey Schofield unpacks the mystery surrounding that photograph of Princess Kate. Why were news agencies calling it fake? And we'll bring you all of the latest goss from the Oscars. That's after this. Welcome back. For Mother's Day in the UK, Kensington Palace released this photo of the Princess of Wales, smiling and surrounded by her 3 children. It's the first photo we have received of her this year, or is it? Major news agencies, including the Associated Press, Reuters, and others, removed the photo from their websites and issued a kill notice because, as the AP put it, it appears that the source has manipulated the image. Now, this was an image that we were told was taken by Prince William. Let's take another look. Seems normal to me, but if you look at her left hand, this had tongues wagging, there's no wedding ring. What's going on with Prince Louis's fingers? There is so much analysis of this photo. And can any of this be a product of artificial intelligence? Joining me now is royal reporter Kinsey Schofield. Kinsey, this is kind of hilarious, I've got to say, the attention, the analysis of every little bit of the photo. But this photo was released really to put an end to all the conspiracy theories about Kate and the fact that we haven't seen her since Christmas Day. But talk about an own goal.
This is such a huge fail for Kensington Palace. The Princess of Wales's big debut should have been something carefully crafted, scrutinized, and strategized. I think there are 2 possible options here. I had one photographer tell me that some cameras take a series of pictures in rapid succession and create a composite, or simply a la Kardashian, where each child, photographed better with a different expression throughout the photo session, and someone tried to drop the highlights on to one image, creating errors. Kim Kardashian has become notorious for doing this on her social media, and it's something that you see happen quite often as technology and photography apps evolve. But it's, this is I really think that the palace has let the Prince and Princess of Wales down here. This is not a positive reflection on them. And it's, like you said, generating more questions, creating more chaos surrounding the state of the princess's health.
Oh, it has given birth to a whole new series of conspiracy theories. So the whole point of this photo appeared to be to say, Princess Kate is fine. All these concerns about where is she, what was the abdominal surgery about, why was she in hospital for so long, why haven't we seen her all year? And you know what? I think there's now some weight to all those questions, Kinsey, because she is the most popular royal. She is the mother of the future king. She's going to be a queen. And I think though it's a private matter, you can understand why the public has great interest in her well-being.
It's just too many missteps at this point. We also have Uncle Gary on Celebrity Big Brother saying he doesn't feel comfortable commenting on the princess's current status, but when they announce it, he'll react. What are they going to announce? It's just little things like that. But when it comes, I did want to make one point that when it comes to this giant ring that we typically see the Princess of Wales wearing, Catherine, Princess Diana used to love to tease that ring was a menace. She actually owned 2 of her famous black sheep sweaters. There's the first one she sent back to Warm and Wonderful after her chunky sapphire got caught in and tore a giant hole. She asked them to fix it. They sent her another one. So I think that this ring is just kind of a mess, and she probably doesn't want to deal with it while in recovery.
Oh, and a lot of people take off their wedding rings throughout the day because, well, they get knocked about and they can be annoying. Now, some royal insiders are also claiming that Prince Harry has not reached out to his sister-in-law since she did have that 2-week stay in hospital for abdominal surgery back in January. But we've also hearing that ill feeling is mutual, with reports saying that Princess Kate wants nothing to do with him.
Well, when I saw we were going to be discussing this, Rita, my first instinct was to text you. Can you blame her? Can you blame her? I wouldn't want anything to do with him either, especially with how protective they're being around her health right now at this very moment. He's obviously an individual that you can't trust. He published word-for-word text message exchanges between the Princess of Wales and his wife, Meghan Markle, in his book Spare. You know, he sold his soul. So yeah, I would not trust him. I wouldn't even trust him with a get well soon. I wouldn't take that phone call.
Well, yes, it would mysteriously end up in the newspapers or in a podcast or one of their other platforms. Now, the Oscars were held today. Oppenheimer won pretty much everything: Best Actor, Best Picture, Best Director, as expected. But the award for Worst Host, well, that one is one we can talk about. Jimmy Kimmel had plenty of detractors, including the former president.
I just got a review, and has there ever been a worse host than Jimmy Kimmel at the Oscars? His opening was that of a less than average person trying too hard to be something which he is not and never can be. Get rid of Kimmel and perhaps replace him with another washed up but cheap ABC talent, George Slopanopoulos. He would make everybody on stage look bigger, stronger, and more glamorous, blah, blah, blah. Make America great again. Okay, now, see if you can guess which former president just posted that on Truth. Anyone? No? Well, thank you, President Trump. Thank you for watching. I'm surprised you're still watching. Isn't it past your jail time?
He kind of proved Trump's point there. That was about as funny as an ingrown toenail, Kinsey.
You know, it just kind of boils my blood to watch the elites kind of laugh at what there is a huge amount of Americans that love that man. He has cultivated a real loyalty, and he made a lot of pot shots at the right, not so much at the left. And there's plenty of material there. There's plenty. There were a lot of people fell down. A lot of people ran into things along the red carpet this year. There's your go-to Joe Biden, gag. But I just thought that was unnecessary. He was also very mean-spirited about Robert Downey Jr., who has paid his dues. And this should have been a night for him to really celebrate. And it was ugly of Jimmy Kimmel to bring up some of his past drama.
Yes, and there was also a bit of controversy with the activism that we always expect on these award nights. There were a few of the actors and even musicians were wearing these red badges, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. How was that received?
I mean, it's not. I think that it's going to be received in my city. I think it's going to be fine. Probably plenty of high fives, but when it comes to the American public in general, we don't want to hear these people preaching at us. They don't have the same problems we do. It's not heat or eat when it comes to wintertime. It's not, they're not worried about immigration. That's not a concern to them. So we don't want to be preached to by these people.
You're absolutely right there. Ricky Gervais said it best when he was hosting the Oscars a few years ago. Kinsey Schofield, thank you so much for your time this evening. That's it from me tonight. Don't go anywhere. Up next is Newsnight. I'll see you at 11 tomorrow. Good night.